This is Rose Miller, and she served in World War II in the Army Air Forces Nurse Corps.
Right.
And she's going to answer a few questions today. First of all, Rose, what I would like you to do is summarize a little bit of your history in the Army Air Forces, when you came in, why you came in, what you did, and what caused you to get out.
Okay. Well, when I entered the service, I was assigned to Atlantic City, and we had about 250,000 troops in Atlantic City. They had taken over all the hotels up and down the boardwalk. They turned one of the hotels into a hospital. And I served in the hospital until I was sent to flight training. And I think we had just about everything under the sun. We went through a meningitis epidemic. Well, it wasn't really an epidemic, but it was bad enough. And we say we lost about 5. These we could not save. No way. They were failed. But we saved the rest of them. And we were picking them up because we knew exactly what we were looking for. And with the penicillin, we didn't even have penicillin at that time. We had the sulfa drugs. And sulfadiazine saved so many of them. And there, I was sent to flight training in Bowman Field, and we were there about 6 weeks. And from there, we graduated our class in August of '43. And we were sent overseas. We were sent to Hickam Field. Nobody knew where we were going, so instead of, they issued us Arctic clothing to fool the Japs. So of course, by the time we kept our Arctic clothing for a long, long time until toward the end of the war, they asked us to turn it all in. They kept us there. Well, we were there close to 6 months because Admiral Nimitz said, there's no place in air evacuation in this war. Well, we proved him wrong. And we sat almost for 6 months, and all we did was fly inter-island around. The first long flight, we had to go down to Canton Island to bring back the crew of a plane that, as it was taking off, hit a bunker and blew. And we had to bring these burned cases back. So of course, 2 of us went down. We flew down, and it's usually about 8 hours down. We picked them up, and they were all bandaged from here on up. Now, they did such a wonderful job at Canton Island that when these boys recovered, all they had was maybe a couple of scars on their face. So right after that, in fact, that particular day we were sent up on a bivouac. We were up there about a week when we saw, I think it was 5 LSTs ready for loading. When they blew, we were way up on the top, way up above Pearl Harbor when we saw them go. So they delayed the action. They were ready to invade the Yap Islands and then go on from there, but they delayed that and went right on to Saipan right after that. I think it was sometime in May when they decided to go on to Saipan. So they decided they would break us up. We were 24 nurses plus the chief nurse. There were 6 in a flight with flight leader. They sent one flight down all the way to New Guinea, another one to Guadalcanal. One They sent one flight on the other way into Kwajalein, Tarawa and Kwajalein, and then the fourth flight took the States around. And in 3 months, we were rotated. Oh, there are always kind of funny stories coming out of them. Now, out of every plane load of patients coming up from the South Pacific, we had to have 5 psychos. When they took an island down in the South Pacific, and they had it secured, they stayed there, and another group went into another island. So these poor fellows got stuck with nothing to do. So they went stir crazy. Well, I'm evacuating 5 of them, and one decided that while he was on the plane, he had to use the latrine. Well, he came out and went streaking up and down the plane. Now, there's a peculiar story that came out of New Guinea. Now, to this day, I don't know who evacuated him, because there were at least 3 flight nurses. There was a story about this boy in New Guinea who saw ducks. They tried everything. They finally sent him back to duty, and he still had his ducks, and so they decided to send him back to the States. Now, the flights were long. The flights from New Guinea to Guadalcanal. From Guadalcanal to Canton Island is 8 hours. Another 8 hours to Hickam Field. Another 14 hours to the States. Well, one hour out of San Francisco, he calls a flight nurse over and says, "Lieutenant, you can have the ducks now. I don't need them anymore." But some of the things that we evacuated, out of every flight, each one of us had different experiences, different patients, different things. We evacuated, well, I helped them when we had like a service hospital on the line. So when the patients came in, we could take care of them before they went out again. They were evacuating jungle rot. It was just almost like this bacterial infection that was hitting a lot of people up here. But let me tell you, it was worse. How these nurses was able to manage the smell was unbelievable, because when we took care of them on the line, redressed them, it was unbelievable. Unbelievable. This is what we were evacuating. They couldn't send them out by ship. They would never have made it back. They would never have made it back by ship. When we evacuated Saipan, the hospital ships would go in, pick up all the sick and wounded. They would land at Kwajalein. They would unload about 1,500 out of the hospital ship in Kwajalein. And we took them all back to Hickam Field in less than a week. If they went by ship, it would have been 3 weeks in and 3 weeks back. And we had them all out. We had them all back in a week. I think that the flight nurses suffered more from the flying than we did anywhere else. We were flying at sustained periods of time, not 4 hours and rest. We were doing 20 hours at a clip. And we would come off shaking. We weren't able to eat. We couldn't sleep. And one of the flights almost cracked up. They flew more combat. They flew more hours. That one flight flew more hours than the combat pilots did in 6 weeks. And then, well, one of the girls said that she couldn't take it anymore. She said she's going back, so she asked for a transfer out. Another one, I think she finally turns to drugs.
What kind of drugs?
I don't remember. All we had was morphine. They were the small syringes, the needle on the end, and that was it, you know. But she got out of it, and she was okay. But I mean, the pressures that we were under were constant. Because if anything happened to the plane and you went down in the drink, you were finished. While we were there, General Harmon was leaving Hawaii, and he was going to Saipan with his crew. The plane went down in the Pacific, and to this day they couldn't find him. So stop and think, if any one of us went down, we were finished altogether. Yet we didn't think about it. We didn't think about it. And half the time we would come in on 3 engines and hope to God we didn't feather another prop. And yet we never thought about it. Sometimes we had to do things that, and as far as the crew was concerned, we were the only nurse on the plane with our assistant, and that's it. Whatever happened on that plane, we were responsible for. And I picked up this flight in Guadalcanal. When I picked it up, it came from New Guinea. She says, I think you better wire ahead for a whole blood transfusion. And she told me why. The boy was suffering aplastic anemia. God knows, aplastic anemia, I'm sure he had leukemia in those days. Who knows what he had? And he was already oozing blood from his mouth. And I said, this boy needs oxygen, definitely. And all we had is a small tank like this with a mask. That's all, with a mask. We got on the plane and everything's fine. I strapped the mask on his face. He said, I have to spit. Off goes the mask. I put it back on. I have to spit.
Tell me about your wedding, and then tell me about getting out of the service after that.
My husband was in the Signal Corps, and I think he had just gotten back from Tarawa. And he knew all the medical personnel at the hospital. And of course I got to know all the doctor personnel. And I guess we were going with...
Why did he know the people at the hospital?
Not the nurses, but the doctors, the MDs. And so, I mean, if we went anywhere, we always went with a group. Some of the crazy things that we would do too. And so, I was flying all around, and he went to the Palaus. And like I said, we corresponded. And, just trying to think. I had to go home. I had a flight back to the States. And one of the colonels came over with me, and he called his father, because his father was ill, and I called home. And when I called home, I found that my sister was dying. So he says, I'm sending you home on an emergency leave. So when I came back, I was gone about 3 weeks. Nobody knew where I went, but it was all legit, you know. And it was just shortly after that that my husband proposed and we were engaged. I went out on a flight. When I came back, he was going to the Palaus. And so, with correspondence, we set a date for February. And we were married on February 15th. But he had to get leave from the Palaus to come up. But I knew, I got to know the general who lived next door to me. And I was complaining to him that my husband couldn't get a leave to come up to get married. Well, somewhere along the line, my husband got his leave. And we were married in Hickam Field, in the chapel. It was the chapel near the hospital. Well, on one of my flights to the States, I couldn't get a wedding dress. So it was like a white bridesmaid's dress with a short veil.
Where did you buy it?
In San Francisco. And my matron of honor also found her dress there too. We couldn't find anything. Even San Francisco was having that trouble. But because I was just about this big, the only thing I had to let the waistline out and everything else was, was fine. But then he had been overseas almost 3 years, and he was due for rotation. But even in those days, there was no such thing as rotation, but it was still rotation. And actually, we were overseas already 18 months, and we were due for rotation also. But even then, we didn't know. So around April, we decided that if he was going to go back, and I was going to go back, you couldn't be, married couples didn't live together then. He would be in one end of the country and I'd be at the end. We didn't know when the war was. So we decided I would get out of the service. So I got pregnant in April. And I came back in June. My last flight was to Okinawa. We went into Okinawa on the red alerts. They were bombing Naha. We came in on red alerts. We were down 2 hours, loaded up our patients, and out.
Were you already pregnant at that time?
I was pregnant. That's when I better get out. I had begun to heave, Otherwise, if I didn't, I probably would have stayed.
So you were on these flights to Okinawa.
But yes, we came back to Saipan. And that's another crazy story. While we were on Saipan, we were in these barracks. We were in the barracks. We were in the last set of barracks away from the hospital. And there was a screen door in one end and a screen door in the other. I happened to go out the screen door one day, and it slammed back on my finger. It began to bother me very badly. Well, it couldn't sleep. Everybody's bedded down. 2 o'clock in the morning, I hear a door slam. There are Japs all over the place, remember. Then I heard footsteps in the gravel. And it was quiet. Then I hear footsteps in the gravel, and I hear a door slam. And I'm laying in that bed, and I can hardly breathe. I'm scared. Finally, I got up enough courage, and I said, "Prowler! Prowler!" So, of course, the lights went on. MPs came running, and they searched the place top down, inside, outside, and you name it. Couldn't find a prowler. What do you think happened? Well, everybody fell asleep finally. When we got up the next morning, the nurse across the hall from me said, I got up and went to the latrine. And when I got back, all hell broke loose. You didn't follow the sequence of sounds. She went out the door and the door slammed. She walked on the gravel. When she came back, she walked on the gravel and the door slammed. That's what I said. Funny incidents come out.
Yeah.
All kinds of funny
Now
incidents.
tell me about, you told me that married couples did not live together. When you were on Hickam Field and you were already married, did you live together on Hickam Field?
No. If I went over to his quarters, everybody would disappear.
He was living with other men
Yes.
and you were living with women.
Yeah. Well, you see, like for instance, they moved us out are the big quarters into what they call the bachelor quarters. It was living room, dining room, kitchen, and upstairs was one bedroom. So if my roommate was there, nobody would pay much attention, so he would come. And a couple of times, like when we were in the big house, one time he, before they moved us over, he handed me, he said, look, I want you to take my gun and keep it under your pillow, because we did have a problem. There's a lot of the men. A couple of times our houses were broken into. One of the girls got hit over the head. Soldiers. Yes, soldiers. So, I mean, while we were there living in the big houses, they had all of our quarters wired so that when they couldn't come in. Once they hit the wire, the alarm would go off. But this was before they wired it.
When did you never got to live with your husband then until you left Hawaii?
I couldn't live with my husband until we got back overseas, and then he got out of the service. The war, I went back home. And he didn't get out until VE Day, VJ Day. And that was in August. I had already gone home in June. And he didn't get out until, he got out, yeah, it was the end of August. Or it was actually into September when he finally got home.
How did you spend the rest of your nursing career?
Hmm?
How did you spend the rest of your nursing career?
I didn't work for almost 10 years. And then I went back to work. And I decided as long as I had the children, I started to work nights. I was doing private duty at night in the hospital. And I continued working nights for almost 20 years. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody.
Where was this?
Brooklyn Jewish.
In New York.
Hmm?
New York.
Yeah, Brooklyn. When I first went down to training in Brooklyn Jewish, it was world known. We had the finest doctors you can imagine, brain surgeons and all. But then because of the area, starting to go down.
When you came back, do you feel like other nurses, civilian nurses that hadn't experienced the war, how did they feel about you and your service?
Once I went back to work, I was just another nurse. It didn't make any, because I think that most of the nurses that did go back had been in the service one way or the other. I mean, whether they were in the Navy, whichever way they were. Most of the girls that I worked with had already been in the service, so it was just, you're just another nurse. There was no distinction almost. Just picked up where you left off and just continued.
Did you get any medals or?
Yes, we all got our which one did we get? Oh yeah. I to be honest with you, I don't even remember. Don't even remember. I know we got the, gosh, I don't even, what that includes? Never was it. We all got them. Some sort of an Air Force medal. Don't ask me. I just put them into the drawer and that was the end of it.
Do you have any advice for today's military nurses?
Yes, I think it's a wonderful career if they want to go into it. I think it's a wonderful career because the experience that they're going to be getting and the people they're going to be meeting, if they want to go on with their careers, it's going to help them a great deal. A great deal. where I'm living now, every now and then they might have a little, I don't know whether you'd call it senior citizens or what it is, or veterans or whatever. And we go to the school and kind of sort of tell you a little bit about yourself. And there was a Marine standing there, and he was the captain. And I looked at him and I said, I shook my head. And he said, why? I said, every time you boys go into something, the Army has to come in and bail you out. Well, it happened in Saipan. The Marines went in and pushed. And they pushed, and the Japs came in right around them. And the Army had to go in and bail them out. So, look, didn't want to talk to me after that.
Okay. Rose, thank you so much for your interview.
But remember, we suffered more from the flying. It was unbelievable. The flights were so long, and I'll tell you the truth, there were times when they were so boring because you were sitting there for almost 8, 9, 10, 12 hours. By the time you came off, you couldn't even see. That was that word. Oh, anyway. Thanks again. And as far as, I'm going to have to get my daughter to write up some of these because my hands don't work anymore.
Do you have anything written?
No. No, I have my daughter do it for me.
You don't have anything written? Okay.
Nope.
Okay, well that was an excellent series of stories. And we were stationed in Hawaii. I was the chief nurse at Hickam Hospital, and it's still the same building. It's been added on to, of course, but it's still the same building that was there.
But you see, we didn't, when we brought the patients in, what they did is they set up like almost like a dispensary on the line, so that we wouldn't interfere with the hospital because we would be going in and out.
Yeah, so you didn't know where the patients went, if they went to Hickam or Tripler?
If we came up from the South Pacific, some of them had to be dressed like when they like the jungle rot like that. We had to just take all these bandages off and rebandage them and pat them up again and all of that. And so they decided that they would set up this like dispensary on the line and we would take care of them there.
Who did that?
The whole medical, I guess the Air Force did it, rather than interfere with the hospital itself.
Okay.
And
so it was other Aerovac nurses?
yeah,
Okay.
it was all, they were manned if it wasn't our turn to go out, then we manned the hospital.
The hospital?
No, I'll use the word dispensary.
Okay, the dispensary that was out on the flight line?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was they just used a building, and that was it. And they set it up that way for us, with all medical supplies and stuff like that. It'd be just like how can I put it? It wasn't even an emergency room.
Okay. Hey, you know that big dorm that was on Hickam? Do you remember a big man's dorm that had been bombed on December 7th? You don't remember that?
All I know that I could see, you could always see pockmarks on them. I don't know whether they're still there or not.
On
A
lots
lot of the
of
buildings
buildings.
still have these big marks on them.
Yeah, they are. There was one big dorm that had been bombed and several were killed inside of that dining hall there that day. And that turned into Pacific Air Force headquarters. That's what it is today.
Oh, well, I really don't know because once it changed, when I went back there 5 years ago, I didn't have time to go to Hickam. I would have gone back to Hickam. But
Where'd you go?
Well, I wanted to go back to where we spent our honeymoon. My daughter and I went, and I was.
Where was that?
We went over to the Big Island.
Oh.
We went over to the Big Island, and
And you
then we
didn't go to Hickam? And you didn't go to Hickam?
No.
Oh.
If I ever go back, I'll go back to Hickam.
Yeah.
I'll go back and take a look and see where we live.
Well, we've got a couple memorials there for military nurses now.
Oh, really?
Right at the hospital.
Well, the nurses who, there were several flight nurses when they were evacuating the babies from Vietnam, and one of them went down,
Yeah,
and her plane went down.
yeah.
But we didn't lose any of our girls.
Okay.
They lost one over in the CBI that I know, and another in the European thing. But considering the fact that we were flying these long flights over the ocean, we didn't
Yeah.
lose anybody.
Wow. And you had no way of communicating with a doctor?
We had no
Anywhere.
communication whatsoever. If anything happened on that plane, it's up to you to take care of it.
Wow. Wow. Well, thank you.